So welcome to session 2 of Rewire Your Brain. And if you did at all miss session 1, no worries. Each one of these are recorded and the replays are available within our course portal. So you will have to re-register in the sense of registering for that portal in order to gain access. And that'll be important not just for the replays, but also any workbooks or PDFs that we will be using within the next 2 sessions as well. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat as we continue along. Mute yourself just so that we don't have any interference, especially for our recordings, and we'll get started. All right, so we did a meditation activity. We've already done that, but we'll do it here again towards the end, just to make sure that no one missed that. So neuroplasticity, we'll be diving deeper into neuroplasticity today, talking a little bit more of the ways that that is impacting in our brain. And then we'll be diving into interventions along with case studies and how people are using neuroplasticity to get amazing results. Our disclaimer that we would love if you could run this by any of your healthcare team. And the reason being is as we get in deeper on different activities and nutrition and vitamins and things along that nature, some of those do have interactions with medications. So it is great to check that with your team. So diving into neuroplasticity a little bit deeper here. So the mechanisms and how the brain changes are chemical, structural, and functional, which we're going to dive into in this next slide. The things that influence what shapes those changes is the lifestyle mindset, novelty, which is that new experience, which creates a lot of emotions, the repetitions, and accelerators. And so let's look at this a little bit deeper. So chemical, so there are neurotransmitters, there are chemicals that we're exposed to, such as cortisol, dopamine, so things that are naturally occurring in our body. However, they can be dampened as well. It can be our diet, it can be our emotions. So things along that nature that can really impact the chemical makeup of how the brain changes. And then there's the structural side. So new neural connections can grow and they can get stronger. And then if we look at from an injury standpoint, there might be a structural impact, such as a traumatic brain injury. When we get into function, that's how cognition is improving, how physical performance is improving, so how the brain is actually functioning. We can see at the bottom of the screen, there's that short-term memory, long-term memory, and then working memory, and how those align to the chemical, structural, and functional. Giving some better examples of how that works. So if you look at things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, we can see how there's a structural and a metabolic. There's the chemical and then the functional. And so how we start to utilize changing the brain and how neuroplasticity works, we look at the other side here. So those chemical changes, we're applying nutrition, medication, supplements, and stress regulation. And stress is super important because it is dumping a lot of chemicals that our body is making in and affecting the brain. And then those structural changes. So anytime we're repeating something over and over, and then we have movement, therapy, practice, and then those functional changes. So that would be some of that brain training, our routine, stimulation, skill building, and really bringing in those challenges. And if we look at this as a whole, neuroplasticity and most of the approaches with neuroplasticity is it's not a one thing fixes a certain type. Or like there's not going to be one neuroplastic thing to do for Alzheimer's. We're going to take a multi-level, a multi-approach to this and how we work with it. So for Gary, and if you haven't attended the summit, Gary was our very first speaker for the summit. You go to the website and enter your information in for those replays, and you'll get access to all the replays. It was quite amazing. And Gary had a traumatic brain injury, which led to epilepsy and seizures, amnesia. He was having a really hard time, right? It was very hard to focus. It was very hard to mentally interact. And he brought on a lot of his own therapy, researching neuroplasticity. And with that, he did the traditional approaches. But then he also designed his own program to go along with it. And he was very insistent on exercise based. And he was noticing how he felt better with exercise. So he increased that. He did 3 sessions a week of cardio, strength, coordination based exercises. So table tennis and any tennis based, that hand eye coordination is shown to really help with the brain as well. And then Tai Chi, this is that more mindful movement. I had just did a presentation last night for the Parkinson's support group and talking about this very mindfulness-based movement. And then some more hand-eye coordination with sparring as well. Now he didn't just go all in and see results instantly. It took time and it took build up. He also really promotes the brain HQ training and to help train the brain on this more internal level. He did make sure that he increased his social interaction. And as you will see, all of the people who have had these remarkable recoveries will talk about the positive attitude. And now he goes out and he helps tell his story, his remarkable recovery, and he's out sharing his story, which he shared his story with us to help give people hope and to show them the power of neuroplasticity and what is available. And so he is no longer, as far as I know, he's no longer having the seizures. He is definitely not having amnesia and he's fully functioning. He's out and sharing his story. And just a reminder, if you have any questions as we move through this, to please put those in the chat and I will get to those as soon as possible. And here our goal is really as we explore these treatment types is to show you that the brain is capable of healing and adaptation more than we've ever thought. And by hearing these stories and going through these interventions, it's our hope to give you this eye-opening view of the wide range of neuroplastic treatments available. Just a little review in how we were applying this is, so we're really looking at having that knowledge first. That knowledge will help us and assist in altering, editing, and improving our lifestyle or maintaining it. And that really sets the stage for us to be able to self-advocate or advocate for our family member or loved one. And in that, then we look to the interventions. So the interventions that we'll be covering, lifestyle, environmental, and social. And if you attended the Why the Brain Needs Friends, definitely social is a huge component. Detoxification, which is one sometimes we don't always think about. And then the ones that seem to make a big impact is that cognitive and behavioral. There are some pharmaceuticals that are recommended, and then the neuromodulation as well. All right, so let's dive into lifestyle. Lifestyle is so much more than sometimes people think of it as like a background noise, that it's a daily rhythm. And this daily rhythm is what is very much forming these neural connections in your brain. And so it's super important for us to look at what are we getting into our daily lifestyle, and not in a way to shame or make us feel bad in any way, but to really take a awareness approach to see where we can be adjusting things in order to improve our recovery or our enhancement. And so it's a multi-system approach, as I just mentioned. Movement, so 3 times a week, 45 minutes of walking. Every book that we have read with the Neuroplasticity Alliance seems to continue to mention this, that is having remarkable benefits for anyone's brain, let alone if you are trying to recover. Nutrition, which we're going to dive into a little bit more in just a moment, as far as the Bredesen method or protocol that is really having remarkable results as well. where it's reversing Alzheimer's. It is having huge impacts on reversing symptoms of Parkinson's, for example, and many other conditions. And it's really an anti-inflammatory approach. Inflammation is going to hinder not only your brain, but it's also the biggest cause of cancer as well. So sleep. Sleep is really what we need for our brain. It's going to help detox our brain as well as consolidate what we've done for the day. Stress, I think we've all we've all noticed at some point when stress gets high, brain function goes down. I used to teach at the university, and that was one of the first things I would say the first week with my students. I was like, "Hey, get a hold of your schedule and everything now because as stress goes up, your memory is going to go down and your motivation as well." And then when we look at stimulation, we're really looking at things that really bring in all of your senses. When we look at novelty, it's that first time you experienced something. You're taking in the sounds, the smells, but you're also looking at what is going to build new brain connections. And then toxins. We're getting toxins exposed to us all day, every day. And our body has its own recycling system to help pull all those out of the body. However, there's things that we can do that either hurt or help that. And then nutrient deficiencies. If you do have a nutrient deficiency, and that's what blood work is super important to be able to identify those. However, we'll go into, I believe, next week more about sometimes in the typical medical world, there might be a deficiency, um, but it's within a healthy range on their systems. So being able to look at that a little bit differently. So just here, just highlighting again the exercise. And we're talking about walking, not, it doesn't have to be super intense, but really that 45 minutes is the sweet spot. And the question I typically get here is, well, can it be a cumulative 30 to 60 minutes? And really science is showing that it is a continuous 30 to 45 minutes for you to be able to get the best benefits. And BDNF, which is a brain-derived neurotropic factor, we'll mention that several times throughout these presentations, BDNF. It promotes that synaptogenesis, which is the ability for those we showed the video last week where there's these little tentacles or dendrites coming out, and they're making connections. And so that really enhances the ability for those new connections, neural connections to be happening. Now, it also enhances, so this is the cool part, it enhances the effectiveness of additional therapies, so those traditional therapies that you might be doing as well. And then sleep. Sometimes it's easier said than done, and I definitely get that. But setting yourself up, and again, we'll talk about this more next week, where we'll go into a little bit more group activity, setting yourself up for healthy sleep. And so one little thing, right, is like not having a screen in your face or any artificial lights in front of your face an hour before going to bed, and learning some new strategies around that. Now, when we talk about nutrition and supplements, these are the key ones that we're seeing are having beautiful benefits for your brain. And that would be fatty acids, so those omega-3s, the vitamin B complex, as well as C, D, E, and K. Antioxidants, so berries tend to have a lot of those as well. And then the neurotropic and herbal supplements, a lot of the mushroom-based ones. Um, there's mushroom coffee and all these things nowadays to help us get this in, but there's also them in a capsule form too. And again, let me just mention, share that with your doctor. So here's the book, and I actually have this one here with me, and I'm reading it more and more to start implementing it for myself. The book is The End of Alzheimer's Program, and so this is what we'll refer to a lot as the Bredesen Protocol. And although the title says Alzheimer's, this is the protocol that is being implemented, not with just that, but also Parkinson's and many other conditions, And really, it's a whole food-based program, an anti-inflammation-based program. And the results are astounding. I mean, with Alzheimer's, which we're going to talk about here at Case Study in just a moment, they're reversing the symptoms. And for a lot of people, that's hard to believe that, this condition that we're told is progressive and it's only going to get worse. They're reversing the symptoms. Now, the catch is they go off the protocol and then the symptoms come back. So it's not a cure, but how many of us would love something in order to reverse symptoms? Because the symptoms are really, the more painful part that we're living with. So, for example, memory improvements are observed. The cognitive decline, especially in those early stages, are very much reversed. And then it's also a stabilization so that the condition doesn't get worse. And people are seeing improved daily function, and it's all over, right? They're getting better sleep. They're having a better metabolism. They're overall seeing so many improvements in their life. And so Frank utilized this protocol and he saw improvement very quickly. And so then he kept getting better at it. And he was one of those, he did relapse. He came off the protocol and then got back on. And in this process, he was able to write two new books at 73. And in that, like, he no longer needs that assisted care. He was going to need care 24/7 at the state he was in. And then he got to the state where he could take care of himself and write two books. So it's pretty impressive when we can begin to implement these things. And just a reminder of what we talked about last week. And mindset is a big factor. You have to believe it, you have to own it. I mean, it's a lot to change up your diet to that extent. And be able to be positive and optimistic about it. Understanding the steps and seeing the big picture. And then this is where you have the opportunity to enrich that soil by making these changes. And then as we move into more interventions, right, like having these tools to note when to use them so that we can get those visible output changes. Environmental and social. So this is going to help with our brain's potential, not just outside of our life, but also what's happening inside of our mind as well. So, participating in regular group activities really does enhance that BDNF. It enhances our plasticity. And again, if you read into this book or listen, it is an audiobook as well, Why the Brain Needs Friends. It talks about how just cortisol levels, if we're alone, our cortisol levels are naturally up versus when we're with people, they are naturally down. Now, depends on what people you're around, right? So we want loving, supporting activities. Maybe it's a support group or something of that nature, or being with people that you enjoy being with. Um, what type of environments you're putting yourself into. So lower stress hormones also happen when you are in nature. And The Brain at Rest was another book that we have also utilized within our book club. And talking about being in nature, there's little things like even just having houseplants in your vicinity will naturally put you in a better mood, and it's changing the chemicals within the brain as well. And stress reduction and emotional well-being. So mindfulness-based activities, meditation, enjoyable hobbies, movement exercises like Tai Chi, those are all helping to support your hippocampal neurogenesis. And it's really beautiful because this is where we can not only reduce our stress, which is nice, but we're also looking at how we see the world, and it will continue to enhance our positive mindset as well as reinforce those connections within the brain as we create new connections. So this one's quite interesting. If you all have not heard of Barbara Arrowsmith, I'm going to play a video of hers here in just a moment. Her programs are taught internationally in 100 plus schools to children's. And there's also online programs for adults and prison-based programs as well. So instead of telling her story, I am going to pull this up because it is quite beautiful. And I hope that you all can hear it.
I want to share a little secret, which I hope will not be a secret by the end of the talk. I am truly, madly, deeply passionate about the human brain. Science has taught us that our brain shapes us, that it makes us uniquely who we are. And if we think about our brain, it has 200 billion neurons. Think about the world's population. That's a mere 7 billion. And we have hundreds of trillions of connections in our brain. If we imagine all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, there are more connections in our brain than all of those stars combined. So this incredibly complex organ that we carry with us everywhere we go, it does shape who we are. It is a filter. It filters our perceptions and our understanding of ourselves, of others, of our world, and of our place in that world. And what is incredibly amazing is no two brains are exactly alike. If you look at the person next to you and you note all the physical differences between you, the shape of your nose, the color of your eyes, your height, there are more differences between your two brains than all of those physical differences in combination. So our brain does make us uniquely us. And I'm here today to share with you my story. And it's the story of how I came to learn that not only does our brain shape us, but that we can actually shape our brain. And my story began in grade 1. And in grade 1, I was identified as having a mental block. I was told I had a defect. And I was told I would never learn like other children. And really, the message at that time was loud and clear. I was told I needed to learn to live with those limitations. And this was 1957, and it was the time of the unchangeable brain. And childhood was a profound struggle for me. I couldn't tell time. I couldn't understand the relationship between an hour hand and a minute hand on a clock. I couldn't understand language. Most of what I read or heard was really as intelligible as the Jabberwocky. I could understand concrete things. If somebody said to me, the man is wearing a black coat, I could paint a picture in my head and I could understand that. But what I couldn't do was understand concepts or ideas or relationships. So lots of things were confusing. I pondered, how could my aunt also be my mother's sister? And what did that fraction, 1/4, really mean? Any kind of abstract concept was hard for me. Irony in jokes, that was impossible. So I learned to laugh when other people did. Cause and effect, it did not exist in my world. There were no reasons behind why things happened. My world was a series of disconnected bits and pieces of unrelated fragments. And eventually, my fragmented view of the world ended up causing a very fragmented sense of myself. And that wasn't all. This whole left side of my body was like an alien being, unconnected to the rest of me. I would bang and bump into things on the left side of my body. If I picked up anything in this left hand, I would drop it. If I put this left hand on a hot burner, I would feel pain, but I had no idea where it was coming from. I was truly a danger to myself. My mother, she was convinced I would be dead. by the age of 5. And then, if that wasn't enough, I had a spatial problem. I couldn't imagine three-dimensional space. I couldn't create maps in my head. I would constantly get lost, even in my friend's house. Crossing the street instilled terror. I could not judge how far away was that car. Geometry was a nightmare. I felt incredible shame. I felt there was something horribly, horribly wrong with me. And in my child's mind, when I'd heard that diagnosis of having a mental block, I actually thought I had a wooden cube in my head that made learning difficult. And I didn't have a piece of wood in my head, but I wasn't far wrong. I had blockages, as I was later to learn, in very critical parts of my brain. And I tried all the traditional approaches. They were all about compensation and about working around the problem, finding a strength to support a weakness. They were not about trying to address the source of the problem. And they took heroic effort and led to rather limited results for me. Then, grade 8, I hit the wall. I could not imagine how I could go on to high school and handle more complex curriculum. The only option I could see was ending my life. So I decided to end the pain. And the next morning, when I woke up after my failed suicide attempt, I berated myself for not even being able to get that right. So I soldiered on. And part of what kept me going was an attitude that I learned from my father. He was an inventor and he was passionate about the creative process. And he taught me that if there's a problem and there's no solution, you go out and create a solution. And the other thing he taught me was that before you can solve a problem, you have to identify its nature. So I continued my hunt. I went on to study psychology to try to understand what was wrong with me, what was the source of my problem. And then in the summer of 1977, something life-altering happened. I met a mind like my own, a Russian soldier, Lyova Zizetsky. The only difference being his mind was shaped by a bullet, and mine had been that way since birth. I met Zizetsky on the pages of a book, The Man with a Shattered World, written by the brilliant Russian neuropsychologist Alexander Luria. As I read Zizetsky's story, he couldn't tell time. He described living in a dense fog. All he got was fragments, bits and pieces. This man was living my life. So now, at the age of 25, in 1977, I knew the source of my problem. It was a part of my brain in the left hemisphere that wasn't working. And then I came across the work of Mark Rosenzweig, and he showed me a solution. Rosenzweig was working with rats, and he found that rats in an enriched and stimulating environment were better learners. And then when he looked at their brains had changed physiologically to support that learning. And this was neuroplasticity in action. Neuroplasticity, simply put, the brain's ability to change physiologically and functionally as a result of stimulation. So now I knew what I had to do. I had to find a way to work, to exercise my brain to strengthen those weak parts. And this was the beginning of my transformation and of my life's work. And I had to believe that humans must have at least as much neuroplasticity and hopefully more than rats. So I went on to create my first exercise, and I used clocks because clocks are a form of relationship, and I had never been able to tell time. So I started with a two-handed clock to force my brain to process relationships. And then I added a third hand and then a fourth hand because I wanted to make my brain work harder and harder and harder to pull together concepts and understand their connection. And about 3 to 4 months in, I knew something significant had changed. I'd always wanted to read philosophy and had never been able to understand it. And I just happened to have access to a philosophy library. So I went in and I pulled a book off the shelf and I opened it to a page at random and I read that page and I understood it as I was reading it. This had never happened in my entire life. And then I thought maybe it's a fluke. Maybe that was just an easy book. So I pulled another book off the shelf, opened it, read it, and understood it. And by the time I was finished, I was surrounded by a pile of 100 books, and I had been able to read and understand each page. So I knew that something had changed. My experiment had worked. The human brain was capable of change. And then I decided to create an exercise for that alien part of my body. And for that, I knew I had to work on an area in the right hemisphere, the somatosensory cortex that registers sensation. I created an exercise for that, and I am no longer a danger to myself. And then I decided that spatial problem, because I was really tired of getting lost. And so I created another exercise for that. And I don't get lost. I can actually read maps. I don't like GPSs because I like to read maps now because I can. So I knew now the brain could change. I was living proof of human neuroplasticity. And what really breaks my heart is that I still meet people today, children, individuals that are struggling with learning problems, and they're still being told what I was told in 1957, that they need to learn to live with their limitations. They don't dare to dream. And what I've learned since 1977, when I met Sazetsky and Luria and Rosenzweig, is that yes, our brain does shape us. It impacts how we can engage and participate and be in the world. And every single one of us has our own unique profile of cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And if there's a limitation, we don't necessarily have to live with it.
So now you've seen the living proof of neuroplasticity in action and how this woman, Barbara Arrowsmith, is changing countless people's lives with something that she took information from herself and from others, and she created her own program with the understanding of how neuroplasticity works with exercising the brain in those different ways. And so I think it's so beautiful to see these examples and know what's possible. So we'll dive back in detoxification. I'd like to come back to our garden metaphor on this one. So thinking of all the weeds that can grow in a garden as the chemicals that are suffocating the beautiful plants that are growing. And so key areas that can create toxins within the body. So environmental toxins and pollutions will actually decrease that synaptic flexibility. Mold exposure. This is one that people often overlook in checking their homes for this or the environments that they're in. It can decrease learning and adaptability. And then food allergies, along with substance abuse, decreases memory and focus. So alcohol is a neurotoxin. So he's going to tell people to be very careful with that if you're not eliminating it from your diet. And then pharmaceuticals. So there are neurotropic drugs that increase BDNF and other growth factors. So, for example, the SSRIs or fluoxetine, like Prozac, those do help with that. I do know, like, I've got a kiddo on the autism spectrum that we use Prozac, and it does help her quite a bit. And then neurotropics, so those are cognitive enhancing drugs, and these help with memory and focus. And again, just that disclaimer, like checking with your doctor and seeing if these would be a good fit for you. There's the psychostimulants. Psychedelics we do promote, and there's a beautiful new book that like just came out last week on psychedelic therapy, as well as we did go over a lot of that within the summit. You can catch the replays on the website, and that was on our last day, so day 4. And then there's hormone replacement therapy. So one thing that we don't always think about, but how hormones can be affecting our cognition and having symptoms as well. So this is actually Sherry's daughter, and this was one of the many reasons why, between her daughter and her mother, why the Neuroplasticity Alliance exists. So Sophia was having dyslexia. She, at the time, which is now not the case, but at the time, Sherry had to drive all the way to Canada just to get support for new treatments on how to help with this. And Sophia did go from being a C student to now A plus social butterfly. I believe she's on the cheerleading team. And what they did is a 12-week process. And there was a learning center up in Canada that helped retrain the brain to process misunderstood frequencies. And what had happened is she had ear infections a lot as a child, and her brain had attached certain sounds and within that experience. And so they had to reprogram the mind in how to understand the new way of behaving. And it happened with that work within 12 weeks. She was noticing quite a big difference. And she is writing her own book that should be coming out within the next year or two. It's pretty exciting. Cognitive and behavioral interventions. So, movement and sensory integration, as we talked about with the Aerosmith, and cognitive enhancement. So, meditations and mindfulness can help, social engagement can help, sleep can help, nutrition and lifestyle can help, as we've talked about. But here, these are going to be specific therapies. So, neuromovement, Feldenkrais or Anat Banal method, these are very mindfulness based. You'll see similar with Tai Chi and things like that. But this is more of like feeling into your body. It's a body awareness. Constraint-induced therapy. So this can be constricting those and taking sensory away from one area to help another enhance. Task-specific training. Mirror therapy is really interesting with those phantom limbs. Bilateral training. Dance and rhythmic movement are very beautiful, especially as I was talking about Parkinson's. The autonomic portion of the brain is the part that's having a hindrance. And so automatic movements that you would typically do, like walking, typically start to get delayed. There's a shuffling or a freeze. And when we can start to add these neuro movements, these mindful movements, along with things with a rhythm, you have to be more in the moment in order to hear the rhythm instead of using just your automatic and getting into habitual movements. And then there are tools like robotics, virtual reality. We went over some of that in the summit too, so be sure to check those out, those recordings. There's listening therapy and neuro-optic training. And then sensory stimulation. There's this mind body, this emotion, emotion inducing, and then breath work and oxygen support is super important for neuroplasticity as well. Targeted domains. So Brain HQ is probably one of the ones that we continue to hear people say that they've tried and it worked really well. But there's little things that you can do as well, like learning a new language, learning how to play an instrument, and having these strategy and memory games. So maybe you'll start to add that social component and start having game nights at your house to help improve that as well. And then last up is neuromodulation. And this is things like transcranial magnet stimulation. There are the ability to have a probe put into the brain to stimulate. So that's that deep brain stimulation as well. There's the robotic exoskeleton that can help train the body. The vagus nerve stimulation is another one, virtual reality. So there's a lot of tools out there oh, here's the invasive ones, so that deep brain stimulation. There are a lot of tools out there that can assist. What is typically recommended is to try all of the other things first, to give them a shot. If those are not working over time, then we can start to get into the more invasive ones. And yeah, before we close out for today, I always like to open it up for Q&A. And as you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat. A little bit of an overview of many of the different modalities and how we can enhance that really was wrapped up in a beautiful story from Barbara Aerosmith, and how she used a lot of these components in order to make neuroplasticity work for her. And as we discussed, lifestyle, environmental, social, pharmaceuticals, detoxing, cognitive and behavioral and cognition, these are all ways that we can help support that neuroplasticity so that those changes can be made. Your brain has the ability to change. It's pretty exciting. And next week, what we're diving into is really how we put this into play, how you note what's going to work for you, what you've tried. And so we're going to take you through this process that will help you in deciding your path. And again, we'll say discuss that with your team, but in that path. And then on week 4, we'll be diving into really that self-advocacy. And if you are having any troubles with your care team or anything like that, how to approach it, but also how to be your best advocate in that sense. All right. Do we have any questions? Okay. And so we will have those recordings available. I'll send out an email with the next day or two with that link as just a reminder. And we do have ways where you can access recordings at our website, mpallies.org. Sherry does one-on-one discussions, and we always recommend going through this program is best, and then working on implementing those more. If you have additional questions and want some one-on-one, that is available. And then we will be having volunteer opportunities, hopefully in the future as well. If you have any questions and maybe they come up afterwards, right, like that happens, feel free to email me. Yeah, so specific ideas on increasing the hippocampus size is one of the questions, and movement and exercise is the best way to do that. For example, I know that yoga, mindfulness-based activities, but it also being with people and community also helps as well. What happens is we start to do these more mindful movements, and it's allowing us to concentrate in more of this flow style. And that is known to increase the hippocampus size and volume. And of course, walking. Walking that 3 times a week for 45 minutes. Any additional questions? All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here and staying with me as we had some technical difficulties. We may switch and just do Teams next week. And so I'll send that email out just to confirm that with you all as well. All right. Have a great night. Have a great evening, depending on your time zone. And hope to see you next week for session 3. Thank you.
Okay, I'm done.